Welcome back, everybody, to Talk of the Now podcast. This is Gene coming at you, and today we've got a guest on, a guy that I've been wanting to get on for a while. His name is Aaron Blaise, and for those of you that watch the podcast and listen, I don't really go a lot into the art world. It's one of my worlds. It's one of the things that I like to get into and do. Been doing it as a hobby since I was a kid. And I talk about it on the podcast some, and we have a variety of different kind of interviews that I do on here, including things like career-minded people, people that want to get into um, sports and that kind of thing. But I wanted to have somebody come on that's in the art world, somebody that does art and has done art their entire lives, specifically animation. Animation is something that I've been fascinated with, again, since I was a kid, and going all the way back to my days of watching, cartoons of Woody Woodpecker and Snoopy and
Right.
all that kind of good stuff. So we have Aaron Blaise on. Aaron, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much. It's nice to finally see your face and talk to you face to face. This is nice.
Yeah, well, for one thing, everybody, Aaron runs a great website called Creature Art Teacher. Little plug for him here, and we'll get to
Thanks.
that in the interview. And I'm a member of this website. You can become members. It's great. You can do training a la carte. You can do training by buying one episode at a time or one class at a time. It's really good, and it's really cheap, by the way, too, which is great. Not cheap in the sense of
Try to
quality,
give
but
you
cheap.
good value. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So but yeah, glad you're doing great, Aaron. I guess what we'll start with is just to talk a little bit about how. I guess I'll let you have the floor for a second and just kind of talk about how you grew up, where you're from, and um, what got you into wanting to be an artist as you grew older as a child.
Um, Both my parents were artistic. They weren't necessarily artists, but they definitely fell on the artistic side. My father was a musician, professional musician for 30 years. He was also
Hmm.
did construction and all kinds of things. And my mother was a really great draftsman, great artist. And so I was born in Vermont, grew up in Florida, moved to Florida when I was very young, back in 1976, and grew up in South Florida on the west coast of Florida, down in the Everglades, and just really fell in love with that part of the world. I've always been a nature buff. I've always just loved nature, animals, all of that. So it was a really great place to grow up. And I've always loved drawing. And so it was a perfect match. I was always out in the woods bringing my sketchbook, sketching the wildlife around the area. And luckily, I had two parents that were very encouraging. And unlike a lot of kids that say, I want to be an artist, and their parents try to steer them the wrong way or that steer them in a different direction. Um, I was told by my parents I was going to grow up and be an artist just because I was drawing so much, and they never thought I'd be anything else, and neither did anybody else. And so, from the time I could hold a pencil, that's what I wanted to do for a living. And so I grew up drawing nature, drawing animals, and doing that in South Florida. And made it through my high school years. And when it came time to go to college, I went to the Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida, and I majored in illustration. And I wanted to work for National Geographic. That was my big dream. And I lived in this little trailer, when I was a kid, and I kept National Geographic magazines under my bed, and I would read them, and they were kind of my gateway to the world. And I would just dream of going off to these faraway places. And I loved the illustrations in the magazine. And so as I got older, and by the time I went to college, that's what I wanted to do. So I majored in illustration. I didn't do animation. Matter of fact, animation never even crossed my mind.
Mm.
I wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be an illustrator. I wanted to paint, the world, nature. And so by the time I got, probably about my second year in school, and started thinking seriously about, how to get in with the magazine, I discovered that they didn't have the staff illustrators in the way that I wanted to do it. They freelanced all their illustration work.
Hmm.
And I had freelanced my way all the way through college, and I just didn't want to freelance anymore. I wanted to find a good solid staff position with a steady paycheck and insurance and all that stuff, healthcare. And so I started kind of rethinking my goals And lo and behold, I had two companies that were coming to Ringling to interview. One was Hallmark Cards, and the
Hmm.
other one was Disney. And so I thought, well, I'll put together a portfolio for both of them. And lucky for me, Disney was first. I put together a portfolio for Disney, and I thought, maybe I can go in and become. They were coming in to interview for interns to see if they could train people that could draw, see if they could train them how to animate. And so I thought maybe I'd get in there and become a background painter or something like that. And so I put together a portfolio, and I was accepted. And so I ended up, and this is in 1988, and I ended up going to California. I was in Florida, and I hopped in my little beat up Honda Civic and drove to California, and went through the 6-week internship and fell in love with animation, and the rest is history.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so what was that drive like going from Florida how old were you?
I was 19 or 20. I think I was 20.
Yeah.
I'd never been west of the Mississippi. And so here I was, this little surfer kid from Naples, Florida, in my beat up Honda. I had my surfboard in the back, and I was going to hit the waves in California and do this internship, and it was great. And I got photographs of me in the Arizona desert with my skimboard, but yeah, it was a huge adventure. I had no idea what I was going to be getting into, and had a wonderful, amazing time. Yeah, so I ended up getting into Los Angeles about 5 o'clock in the morning, and had to get my key to my apartment. So I went to Disney, went to the studios at 5 a.m. up to the security guard shack and said, "Hey, I'm Aaron Blaise. I need to get my key."
Yeah.
So, and that was the beginning. And 6 weeks I learned animation enough to get hired by the studio. So I went from knowing zero about animation to getting hired to work in a studio after 6 weeks. So there you go. It was crazy.
Well, it's crazy to me to think about too, because I mean, any 19-year-old, you feel like you got the world ahead of you. Like when I was a 19-year-old, I'm going off to college for the first time in South Georgia, and you just don't know what you don't know. That's the crazy part.
That's the blessing and the curse, right? So
yeah,
you think you know it all. Thank God you don't. And then the world just opens itself up to you. And as long as you got the presence of mind to know that you don't know it all, then there you go.
Yeah.
And just soak it all up like a sponge, which is what I did.
Yeah, I was about to say, I would imagine when you walk in there for the first time and your first day and weeks at Disney, you're probably meeting people like Glenn Keane and whatnot, right? And you're trying to figure your
Well, that's the thing. That's I didn't know anything about animation or anybody in the animation field, and so I didn't know enough to be intimidated by anybody because I didn't know who they were.
9 old men meant nothing to you.
Yeah, I didn't know who the 9 old men were. I didn't know what that was, and so it worked out great for me because all of us interns were matched up. We all got matched up with an animator, and that animator was going to be our mentor and take us through and train us for that 6 weeks. So my mentor was Glenn Keane.
Wow.
And all the other guys are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you got Glenn Keane. You're so lucky." And everything. I was like, I don't know who this guy is. Glenn's an awesome guy. I really love, like him. He's an amazing artist, but I really didn't know. I didn't know. It wasn't until I was there for a few days or a week or so that I really kind of understood how lucky I really was.
You're like you're like at day 30 and you're like, wait a minute, this guy's a big deal that I'm hanging out with.
Right. Yeah, this guy's kind of a big deal. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. But I mean, so I'm guessing then you probably started learning kind of the pedigree of all this whole 9 old men stuff.
Yeah, and you just and over the years you just kind of soak it up. But in those first weeks, it was all about just educating myself on the Disney legacy, all the films, and I grew up through the 70s, born in the late 60s, grew up through the 70s, and I saw my share of Disney films, and enjoyed them, but it was never. And I loved watching The Wonderful World of Disney and all that. But that was really, and growing up in Florida, I'd been to Disney World, but that was really my only exposure to the Walt Disney Company and the Walt Disney legacy, and I never once imagined that I would be creating some of that stuff. And so,
Mm-hmm.
when I finally got out there, and I'm meeting the people that created the films that I, grew up on from a Disney standpoint, it was really, really amazing. And then, to also be with Glenn Keane, and for the listeners that don't know who Glenn Keane is probably one of the best well-known contemporary animators that's still alive. He's got a wonderful, history at Disney. He created The Beast. He created Ariel, the mermaid. He created Tarzan. He created a whole bunch of great characters. And one of the wonderful things about Glenn that I was lucky enough to experience was his passion and just the spirit that he brings to animation, because he really sees animation more than just making cartoons. It's this expressive way of letting you expressing art, and it's acting, it's dance, it's music, it's drawing, it's painting, it's all these wonderful performing arts and visual arts and everything all wrapped into one. And it was that passion that he had that I couldn't help but just be affected by it.
Do you know who Glenn's mentor was when he was at Disney, or I guess when he started?
Yeah, Ollie Johnston.
Ollie Johnson.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Ollie
for those
Johnston.
that don't know, we talked about the 9 Old Men. The insiders in animation know exactly what we mean, but could you maybe explain that a little bit to people that have no clue what that even
So
means?
the 9 Old Men were basically the 9 animators that Walt really leaned on through the years to create the films, and they were responsible for designing characters, supervising sequences, and supervising the animation of these characters. And so they were, most of the characters that you can think of that came out of Disney were created by one or all of the 9 old men. And they call them the 9 old men because they were there for 30, 40 years, 50 years in some cases. And they grew old there. They started out young and grew old. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what it reminds me of, because I've been studying business a little bit lately, the history of business and so forth. It sort of reminds me of Henry Ford in a lot of ways. And you probably know this story about how he was talked to someone at some point, and they were asking him the keys to his success or something like that. And he talked about how basically it was surrounding himself with great people. And that's kind of what Walt did, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly what Walt did. And he knew that he didn't have all the answers. He knew that there's a lot of people out there that were better artists, better storytellers, and he wanted to get the best of the best. And so he brought in great illustrators, and together it was these guys that created the original 9 Old Men. These are the guys that created the fundamentals of animation that we watch now. The squash and stretch and timing and appeal and all these different things that we take for granted as rules that we go by when we animate. These are the guys that discovered them and created them and made them what they were. They were great draftsmen. They were incredible storytellers, and they kind of forged the path that we all take for granted now. They're the ones that kind of cleared the way. And if you look at films like Snow White, Snow White being the first full-length feature film, it's also the first color film, feature film. If you look at the quality of that animation, it was still very much in the early 20s kind of rubber hose type style of animation. There was a bit more character in there, but if you see the growth from that to things like Bambi and Sleeping Beauty and some of these other films that came later, Pinocchio, the amount of growth in that short amount of time, artistic growth is what I mean. It's absolutely mind-boggling, because these guys were experimenting and really trying to create through their animation, believable worlds. And so they went beyond and
right,
like I said, created the rules that we follow today.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think for anybody out there that, we look at Disney now and it's just this big conglomerate corporation. But if you get back to the nuts and bolts of how Disney started, it's an incredibly fascinating story to me.
It is. It's a lot of failure and hard work and then falling down again and hard work and then success. And, and you just keep pushing, you keep plugging, you persist.
Yeah.
And it happens. Yeah.
And Walt, not that we're going to do the history of Disney here, but Walt passed away in the 60s. And he
66.
was, okay, yeah. And he had, I guess his brother took over, and maybe another grandson or nephew took over later on.
Yeah, Roy Jr. Roy was Walt's brother, and then Roy Jr. also was deeply. I actually knew Roy Jr. Very well, and he had a big part of the animation side of things. So he, back in the 60s, he was doing nature film documentaries for Disney and that sort of thing. But as we got back into the 80s, I'm not sure how much Roy was involved with animation before the 80s. But I know that when Michael Eisner took over in 1984, the company, they were considering shutting down animation altogether because it just wasn't. It was at a real low point in its history, and it was just a big money suck. And so Roy came along and said, "Look, this is the heart of the company. This is what started the company, and we can't shut down animation. Let me have it, and let's see if I can revitalize it." And so that's when he brought in, people from Broadway and new writers and new thinkers, and really kind of turned it around. And that was around, like I said, 1985. Yeah. And then that's when you had the Great Mouse Detective, you had Oliver and Company, and then the Little Mermaid. And that was kind of the beginning of kind of getting a resurgence in animation. After Little Mermaid, we had the Rescuers, but then it was Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and The Lion King, and just exploded after that. They found this, going back to this musical Broadway structure that that audiences really responded to, but they're also great stories, and so they got some really, really good storytellers in there to help write these films.
So it seemed like in a lot of ways he employed that same thing that we talked about, where he brought in people that were experts in their field. And
Exactly.
Incredible.
And the songwriters were Broadway songwriters, and the head of our studio was ran playhouses in New York, and so it was very much the same, the process. It was just the end product was different.
What was your like brief experience with Roy like? Was he a really cool guy to be around?
It was very cool. I loved it when Roy came in, because Roy loved nature and he loved the outdoors. And so when he would come to our studio in Florida, which is where we were based, I was up on the third floor. We were making Brother Bear at the time. And so he would just come up, him and his wife would come up, and they would just hang out with us. And Roy liked to smoke. He was the only guy that would, sit in the studio at Disney and light up a cigarette and smoke. So he could do that because he was Disney. He did quit after a while, but in the beginning he would hang out and smoke. But yeah, we'd sit there and we would just talk story, and then we'd talk about his he loved to sail, and quite often he did the trip between Los Angeles and Hawaii. He would sail between the two quite a bit. And we talk about that. We talk about I remember the first time I ever went to see Cirque du Soleil. Roy took us to go see Cirque du Soleil. He grabbed a bunch of us and we all went. So he was just for a guy that was as iconic and wealthy as he was a really cool, just down to earth. He loved to come in and just shoot, just talk and hang out and talk. So it was great.
So, well, back then, okay, we're fast forwarding a little bit because Aaron's now at Disney and we've got Roy. Did they do like, how corporations do nowadays? Did they have like corporate meetings and like, that sort of thing where he would kind of talk to the whole company? Because I know they didn't have things like Zoom to be able to talk to everybody.
No, but we did fairly quickly. We did get a early form of video conferencing, but we didn't really use it until later because it was like $7,000 a minute or something. It was crazy. But no, Roy would come in. Roy was more of Roy did come in and he would talk to us, but he wasn't he wasn't the decision maker. He put people in place that ran our division, that ran the animation division. So that was, Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher, who were the guys, and Roy was kind of there, kind of guiding things along, but really he was partnered with them in a way. He wasn't really he was the largest shareholder in the company, but he wasn't working the day-to-day stuff. And so Peter Schneider, Tom Schumacher, they ran the studio. They were kind of business and creative heads, and they answered directly to Michael Eisner.
Okay.
And so, but we would, they would come down. We'd all gather in a big sound stage somewhere on the back lot, or in our big theater. We had a theater, and they would talk to us. Now, after a while, we did get a form of video conferencing, and so and by that point, this is in the mid '90s. We had a studio in Paris, we had our studio in Florida, and then we had a studio in Los Angeles. And so they would annually pull together all the studios at the same time on video and talk to us about the state of the company. Yeah. This is what we have in pre-production. This is what we have in development. This is what and they would just talk about what we're doing. So it was fun.
Okay. Did they have creative? This is just me asking an ignorant question. Did they have creative departments, or a lot of times did like directors say, "Hey, I've got an idea," and they throw it at executives and that sort of thing to figure something out?
We had a thing called the Gong Show. And I know, funny, right? We had a thing called the Gong Show, and it was held once a year. Michael Eisner was part of it. The two heads of our division, Peter Schneider and Tom Schumacher. A few producers were in there, and basically anybody in the company, if they had an idea, could pull together a pitch and come in on this day, and you'd sign up on a sheet, and you'd get 10 or 15 minutes or whatever, and you'd come in and you'd pitch an idea. You'd pitch your idea, and anybody had the ability to do it. And I can't remember what films made it through as a result of the Gong Show. I'd be hard pressed to do that, but I do know people got picked up for development. If an idea was picked up for development, they would get a check for a certain amount of money, and if it went into production, then they get another check for a certain amount of money. So they were rewarded for it. They didn't, just because you pitched an idea didn't necessarily mean you made that movie, but some of them did. And I was a lucky one in that sense, where I was able to come in and pitch an idea and make the idea. But there was always opportunity for people to be heard creatively. So it was very cool that way.
Okay, well, let me do this. Aaron's, I think, a little too humble to go through this, so I'm going to go through it. I'm going to go. I'm looking on the Wikipedia page now, just to go through some of the list of credits that I'm seeing, and by all means, you can correct me or add things that they don't have on here. But just to look at the
got stuff in there I didn't do.
Yeah,
I didn't do that.
Okay, we have animation department, Roller Coaster Rabbit, which is from the Roger Rabbit movie. Yeah, that was sort of shorts they did. The Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Trail Mix Up, which is a short, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Mulan, and then of course Brother Bear. I don't know if there was any other that you'd want to add to that were kind of notable.
No, I mean, there was one little short that I did with Mickey, Donald, Goofy, How to Haunt a House. That was a fun little thing. That was one of the first things I ever directed. But yeah, that's the credit list. So it was, the 90s were very good, and to the animation industry, and to me, I was lucky to come into the industry during that time. Coming in 1988, it couldn't have been a better time for someone to enter that world. And myself, and I was a product of the intern program. I was trained and became an animator, and most of my colleagues in the Florida studio were products of the same intern program, just at different times. I was in the pilot program, but every 16 weeks or so there was a new internship, intern program. And well, basically, I think it was like every 6 months or so, or once a year they'd have it. I guess is what it worked out to be. But uh, so we ended up with a lot of folks that were new to the industry, and we were all together in this little studio. So we were kind of we wanted to prove ourselves that we were the little studio that could, and so we always had something to prove. And to this day, I mean, that was 35 years ago, and I've been exposed to a lot of different studios and different studio cultures. And that little studio that we had back in the late 80s and early 90s and through the 90s, probably the best studio I have ever will work in. And to this day, I still believe it was one of the best studios in the world. It was not just because of, I think we're making great films, which I think we were. It was just the chemistry. It could never be repeated, because it was literally all these young people that had just gotten trained, thrown together to make films and really prove that they had the ability to do it. And as a result of that, we bonded in a way that I've never seen at another studio. And so our families, we didn't just bond at the studio as individuals working for a company. All of our families came together and bonded. And so, we became a tribe. We were very, very tight, very close. And I've never experienced it, even staying within the company, because at one point, the Florida studio in 2004 closed. Disney shut it down and downsized. And so I lost a lot of my friends to the wind, to going off to different parts of the country, the world. And I transferred to the studio in California, which didn't remotely have the same kind of culture or personality. It's a great studio, don't get me wrong. It's a wonderful studio, but
just a different feel altogether.
It was a different feel. Yeah.
Well, that's one lesson that I've learned from you through following your website, is that oftentimes some of the best animation happens with collaboration, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you were talking earlier about Walt and surrounding himself with the best people, and that was probably the biggest lesson I learned as a director, which was, when I first started directing, I was really scared because I didn't have all the answers, and I felt like I was failing because I didn't have all the answers. And the fact was, I was doing fine. It's just you need to know the direction you're going in. You don't need to necessarily have all the answers. You depend on the people you bring in to answer those questions, And so, we would collaborate. We would bring artists in. I remember there in Brother Bear, which was the film I directed for Disney, there was a sequence, the transformation sequence, where our main character, Kenai, is transformed into this bear, and we wanted it to be big and a big spectacle of spirits and ghosts and all these northern lights and all kinds of stuff. And I had no idea how to approach it. And but we pulled together several people, one of the main people being a guy named Richie Chavez. And we said, hey, this is what's happening in the story. Your visual development is unbelievable. We'd love for you to take a crack at it. And so he went away and came back 6 weeks later with storyboards of what ended up in the movie. So it was, it's the collaboration of people that come together to create something that's, no one person would have thought of.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about two of the biggest that come to mind, I guess, for a lot of people when they think of the Disney 90s era, Beauty and the Beast and Lion King. You worked on both those films, right?
I did. Yeah. On Beauty and the Beast, I was one of the Beast animators.
So I guess what were some of your highlights from those two that stick out to you?
Beauty and the Beast was still very early in my career. I was about 24 or 25. And Glenn Keane, who was my mentor, I was talking about earlier when I was an intern, he was creating the Beast. And but he was based in California. You got to remember, a lot of people don't realize that when these films were made in the 90s, we they were all done with 2 studios. We had
Oh yeah, that's right.
we had a studio in California, we had our studio in Florida, and but we worked on the same films together. And so it was difficult too, because you got to remember back then, especially with Beauty and the Beast and the Lion King, there was no emailing,
no video conferencing.
There was no video conferencing, there was none of that stuff. There was no internet, there was none of that. And so we did everything with FedEx. It was crazy.
Oh, wow.
Phone calls and Federal Express, and faxing terrible drawings. But it's amazing we got these films done. But anyway,
Wow.
so I was based in Florida, but we had another animator that worked in Florida that was going to be kind of heading up Belle, Mark Henn. He's just an amazing animator.
Oh yeah, Mark Henn. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible animator. And one of his specialties is animating female leads. He was just really, he draws, he would draw the female leads in just really appealing ways, and his acting was solid, and he's very fast. And so we knew that he would be animating Belle, and so there was going to be a lot of scenes where she would be with Beast, obviously. And so Glenn came to me and said, "Hey, I need a Florida Beast guy to animate with Mark, and so I want you to be my Florida Beast guy." And so that was, there were 6 animators total that worked on the Beast.
Wow.
And so I was one of the 6. I was in Florida, and so pretty much Mark and I did a whole bunch of work together through the film. And so one of the first sequences I got on Beauty and the Beast was this sequence where he and Belle are arguing, where she's trying to bandage his arm after he'd been attacked by these wolves, or when he saved Belle from the wolves. And so they get into this huge argument, but by the end of the sequence, they've come to an understanding. She says, "Thank you for saving my life." And it's the first time they really kind of aren't at each other's throats, no pun intended, so to speak. And so it was just a huge acting opportunity for me. Even animators, a lot like live actors, we look for those big juicy roles that are going to kind of shoot us into the limelight and get us more work. And that's what that sequence did for me. It was, you're only as good as your last film. And so, by the time Beauty and the Beast finished, I did a whole bunch of other stuff in the film as well with Beast, but that was really kind of a highlight for me. And it enabled me to get my own character on the next film, which was Aladdin. And so I went on to Aladdin and I created Raja, the tiger. And I'm going to jump ahead to the Lion King. And the reason I hit Aladdin was because I did this tiger, and then the next film were lions. And so it wasn't a huge leap. And so once again, Mark Henn and I, on Aladdin, I did Raja, he did Jasmine. On Beauty and the Beast, he did Belle, I did Beast. And then in the Lion King, he did young Simba and I did young Nala. So he and I were always kind of partners in crime with our characters. And so by the time we got to the Lion King, I had this little lion cub character and just had a blast with it. And one of the highlights of that was just, being able to animate 4-legged, wildlife. I love animating animals and that sort of thing. And then my daughter was also a huge inspiration in the look of Nala. She was about 3 years old when I went on to the Lion King, and she was a lot of the facial inspiration for Nala. She had the big doughy eyes, and it's great. And she's 34 now and still tells everyone she's Nala from the Lion King.
That's a nice perk.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, okay, you revealed a few things that I don't think a lot of people realize just in what you said about Disney, because I didn't realize this till a couple of years ago that there were actually 2 animation studios back in those days, and that y'all are collaborating back and forth in the 90s via fax and FedEx and telephone.
Yeah, actually, we had, and like I said earlier, we grew to 3 studios, but it was crazy because in the way the process of making an animated film, you storyboard it and sequences get okayed into production, and then back then, once that happens, then they start casting the film, not just from an actor voice standpoint, but animators are cast just like a live actor is cast. And so we would each get a role in the film. Like Glenn Keane was cast as the Beast. But there's so much of the Beast to animate. No, he couldn't do it all himself in the time that was allotted to make the film. And so that's when you bring on other animators and you create a crew. So that became the Beast crew. But we were still, each one of us, the six of us, we were cast to be, the Beast. There just happened to be six actors that became the Beast. And so the way it would work, Glenn being based in California, I would rough out a shot, and him being the supervising animator, he would look over everybody's animation to make sure that we're all staying kind of within the same realm of who the Beast was. You got 6 different people animating the Beast. You want to make sure that you have one Beast and not 6 different versions of the Beast.
Makes sense.
And so, so I would animate a shot. I'd rough animate it, scribble it out, and I'd pack it up into a box and send it off to California. And then I get started on a new shot. Meanwhile, that, goes FedEx, goes overnight to California. And at some point during Glenn's busy day, he goes through my shot, opens up the box, makes his notes, does a drawing, might call me and say, hey, I want you to see on drawing, blah, blah, blah. I did this. And we talk about it. Then he puts it back in the box, sends it back overnight, comes back to me. Meanwhile, I've been working on this other shot. And so I take that shot, put it aside. I get to this box, open it up, and then I go back to that shot. And that's how we made the whole movie. And it's a really inefficient way of filmmaking. And FedEx made a killing off of Disney. But and a big part of our culture back then was, making the 5 o'clock FedEx truck, making sure you got everything done in time for the, to get it into a box and get out the door by 5 o'clock. So that really ruled our lives at the time.
So how long, let's just use an example, Lion King or Beast, how long would it take to create those films from, conception to release?
Well, from conception to release was usually 5 to 6 years.
Wow.
That's
okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And that's all hand
and then,
drawn.
But the actual production time was usually about 18 to 24 months.
Okay, 18 to 24 months.
There's a lot of development that goes into the front end, writing and rewriting, and it's very, very glacial. It just happens very slowly, and then all of a sudden, the last 2 years, the movie explodes. It gets made.
So an 18 to 24 month period, if we translated that to nowadays, let's just say Disney decided they wanted to do another hand-drawn animation on 2D with computers. Would it still take 18 to 24 months, or would it probably be, taken down by a third or so?
No, it would still take the same amount of time, because really the biggest time-consuming part of hand-drawn animation is really the drawing aspect of it. And so drawing on a Cintiq or drawing on paper, it doesn't really matter. It's about the same amount of time. Now, what the time that you do save is in the shooting of all the drawings. But that's, it's kind of insignificant. And when you're looking at the entire length of making a film, you might save weeks out of a two-year, schedule. But I mean, it's really the same process. The tools have just gotten fancier. The pencils are fancier,
right?
And so I'm still drawing every frame. I'm still digitally painting every background. The process of painting is still the same. It's just digital rather than watercolor or oil or acrylic or something like that.
Is that piece of it significantly I guess reduced time-wise for the painting part?
Yeah, it definitely does reduce the time there. And the great thing about working digitally is just how quickly you can composite everything together and get everything shot. So, when like I was saying, when I was animating on paper, my when I'd finish a shot, I'd have to go shoot it, get it onto video so I could send it out to the directors for the directors to look at, or the animators working for me would do the same thing. And that's, depending on the length of a shot, it could take you 2-3 hours just to shoot a scene and then get it out. And then if there's something you don't like or something that needs to be changed, you go back and redraw, then you got to reshoot again. So that was a really time consuming part of it. Or you'd send it out to camera and they would shoot it. So there's things like that, or anyway, what I was getting at was, now when I animate, the process of animation is still the same. I'm just doing it digitally on a screen, and I'm doing it. My primary software is TV Paint, and so I can literally finish animating a shot and then just hit play, and it plays it back for me. I don't have to shoot anything, and then I can make adjustments in timing and right there on the fly. So it's a much more efficient way of making films. I think it reduces, I don't know that it reduces the time substantially, but one of the things it does for me is I think it reduces the head count a little bit, the number of people you need on a crew. Yeah, for sure.
That makes sense. Okay, we may have to do a part 2 at some point in the future, just because there's so much I want to dig into.
Sure.
But because I know we're kind of squeezed on time a little bit here, but I want to cover a few more things before we close it out.
Sure.
Well, a lot of people might be listening to this, and especially if they're like in the 17 to 20-year-old range, or maybe if they're older and they're decided, hey, I'm sick and tired of my 9 to 5. I want to get into doing artwork for a living. What do you tell a lot of people that are wanting to get started, especially because a lot of people that want to do this, I think, are sort of like me. They have a bend toward artistic work, and they want to get into maybe animation or maybe backgrounding or whatever, and maybe doing freelance or working for a studio. What are some of the key steps I think you could advise them on what to do next?
Well, I mean, if you want to do hand-drawn animation, like what I do, which is my world, I always describe it as if you want to be a great writer, or better yet, if you want to be a poet, to be a great poet or songwriter, the more you know whatever language you're writing that stuff in, let's say it's English, the more you know the English language, the better poet you're going to be, because that is the language of your art, right? And so the language of animation is drawing. It's visual drawing. And so the better draftsman you are, the better you can express those ideas that are in your head onto paper, the better you're going to be as an animator, the more art you're going to be able to create, or the more artistic art you're going to be able to create. And so I'm a big advocate on being the best artist you can be. Practice, and always hone your skill. That's one thing. And then there's a couple of other things. Do you want to go into animation more as a hobby, which is, just dive in and start enjoying it. If it's something you want to start doing as a living, or if you want to work for a studio, then that really does put more pressure on you having to be the best you absolutely can be, because it's a very competitive industry. And so getting out there and just honing your skills the best you can that's the best medicine to getting a job, or the best solution to getting a job. And then cast a wide net as well. I mean, so many people get so laser focused on, I got to work for Disney, or I got to work for Pixar, or whatever, and they really miss some great opportunities out there, because those studios are only so big, and it's a battle to get in there.
Right.
But there's a lot of other great studios out there that are doing beautiful work. And so cast a wide net and, see where you end up. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice, because especially for young people, the two questions are, what's it take what do I need to do to get into Disney, and how do I become a director? So it's like, bam, bam, like these big jumps that they want to do. And you don't want to
start at the top.
Well, and then I sound like the grumpy old man, but the younger generation, younger people have grown up in a world of instant satisfaction. Everything is quick and at your fingertips. We even have shows, American Idol, it's instant stardom, and I can't tell you how many times I've watched, American Idol, when you have a 16-year-old kid going, it's my last shot, I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't make it. And animation just isn't that. And so a lot of young people that I've experienced over the years, there's a heavy amount of frustration because they're not succeeding right now. And it's becoming a great animator is sort of like wine. It just takes time and it needs to age and that's what animation is. You need to do it a lot and make discoveries and hone the craft. I hate using that word, but hone that skill because
Get
it's
out there
just
and
not
draw.
yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. And so you just got to let it happen. Yeah.
I remember one of your advices was to just get out there and like just go outside and draw trees in the yard. Go out there to the zoo and draw animals. Go out there to the mall and draw people or draw cars or whatever you see.
Yeah.
You know,
Just draw. Get, as my friend Ronnie Williford likes to say, get the paper dirty.
yeah.
And and if you're not drawing, you're not learning. And that's the key. If there's so many people that say, "Oh, I want to be an animator." How do you get motivated to draw? Well, I don't have to get motivated to draw. I can't not draw. It's like asking, how do you get motivated to breathe? And it's just, and that's
Brushing
the
your
thing.
teeth.
You've got it's in your blood. And the better you get at it, the more of an addiction it becomes. And so, but I'm still, I've been drawing since I could hold a pencil, and I'd be lying if I said I'm not learning anymore. I'm still learning. I'm still growing as an artist, and that's one of the great things about art, music, any of those things that it's something that you can master forever, or learn to master forever. You never become a master.
Well,
and you keep making discoveries.
Something you said earlier about Mark Henn and his ability to be fast.
Yeah.
Now, in my head, I'm thinking to myself, okay, somebody that has ambitions for being a great freelancer, working at a studio or whatever, obviously they need to strive to be like you or someone that's like a Glenn Keane. But Mark Henn, I know from seeing an interview about him recently that he's kind of well known for being super fast and getting it done fast. I would
He was the
imagine.
fastest in the entire studio. Yeah.
Wow. So okay, so I would imagine that he would concur with you tenfold in what you just said. Right.
Much of what I just said, I'm echoing Mark Henn.
Yeah.
Mark Henn's words. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest secret to Mark's success was his butt was planted in his chair for 8 hours a day, and he was drawing. A lot of people will get up, they'll walk, they'll go get coffee, they'll hang out with their buddies on break, or go play a game of ping pong or whatever it is. And but Mark was always sitting at his desk, and he was always, and his process was always the same. He would sit down, he'd thumbnail it all out, he'd figure out the choreography of a shot, he'd sit down and start drawing, and he knew the shortcuts to get, to do partial drawings here or there or whatever. He'd get everything that needed to be done in the shot, and he surrounded himself with great assistants, people that knew how to follow him up, that could draw over his work and create the stuff that ended up on the screen, and he could just move on to the next shot. And so as a result of, Mark Henn and his crew were this very well-oiled machine, very efficient.
Putting that sweat equity in.
Yeah. And so, where, an average animator might animate, I don't know, 250, maybe 300 feet in a film over the period of animating a film.
Yeah.
Mark would do 1,000 feet. He was that much quicker than everybody else.
Did y'all call him the machine?
Mark always said, yeah. Well, Mark's philosophy was I'd ask, he and I would talk, and he was taught by Eric Larson, who's one of the 9 old men. And Eric used to tell him, the best way to influence an animated film, or have the most influence on an animated film, is get the most animation in there, if you're an animator. And so that was always Mark's philosophy. He wanted to influence the movie, so he wanted to get the most animation in the film, and that's how he did it.
Well, that kind of leads to, for those that are sitting at home wondering, how do I get into this more? Creaturearteacher, Cat.
Yeah.
That's his Aaron Blaise's baby, his website. I guess if you could tell us a little bit about it and why, okay, I love your vision behind this, by the way, of
Right.
creating a way for people to basically get a discount, um, a great art education without having to spend all the dollars to go to art school.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer. There's certain things that I just don't think should be for profit. Healthcare, uh, education, and prison systems. Those are my big three. And I just don't think. I think college education has just gone through the roof. The financially, it's just gone absolutely bonkers. And so going back a little ways, I left Disney. My wife Karen passed away from breast cancer,
Mm.
and I went down a dark hole, and I kind of wasn't functioning at Disney anymore. I was taken off the project I was working on, and I realized I really need to make a change. And so I decided to leave Disney after 21 years, and I came back to Florida. This is when I was living in California. Came back to Florida, my home state. I worked for another studio for a little while before they went bankrupt.
Hmm.
And it was at this point that I really decided, you know what, I need to make a change. I want to do something different. I want to get out of the studio world. I don't want to work for executives anymore. I want to be my own boss. And also at the time, I really wanted to do something that would make my wife proud. She was a big advocate of education and helping and all of that. So, and that coupled with this idea of astronomical tuition fees, I started thinking about Glenn Keane and all of the learning that I'd gotten from him, Mark Henn, all these people that had affected me over the years. And I realized this is, YouTube was kind of a couple of years into YouTube, and I was starting to realize that there was a big world that I could access and teach. And so I thought, and there was a few online companies that were starting to do it. And so I thought, I've got something to say, from an animation standpoint and from an art standpoint.
Mhm.
And I think I want to do this and make it really cheap and give people that can't go to school an opportunity to learn and learn from somebody that's been around the block a few times. And our philosophy was, don't be greedy, make it affordable to everybody. We really looked at my business partner Nick Birch and myself. We started looking at all the lowest economic denominators. We looked at some of the poorest countries on the globe and said, if we can make it so that people from this economic structure if they can afford it, then everyone will afford it. And so we can give access to artistic people that might not otherwise have any access to training. And so we went ahead and did that and decided, let's go for a global scale. People are like, why, you're insane. You can't make it this cheap. You should be pricing it at this. You're undervaluing yourself. I said, no, I'm making it to where everyone can afford it. And I'm just getting a lot more people. and it's worked out. It's really worked. And the other thing that it's done is it's created loyalty. People appreciate what we do a lot more. And we've built, over the last 10 years, it's been 10 years now. We've built a really, really great community. And I'm getting wonderful letters from people that said, I couldn't go to college. I couldn't afford it. And I took your classes and I just got my first job in the animation industry.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah.
yeah. And we've gotten a lot of those letters. Or
I
I
was
just
about to
got,
ask you about any success stories you've witnessed.
yeah. Yeah. And I love that. It's great. And then, we can go anywhere in the world and we can fill a room because of, we've got so many people that have taken our courses and
Mhm.
have been influenced by us over the last 10 years. It's really nice. Whether we go to Europe, we go to Asia, we go to South America, we are always able to find somebody that's taken our classes. So it's really cool. And it's like I got this giant global family now, and I absolutely love it.
Well, a few things that I'll point out that I think are great is that for those that are just you don't have a dime to your name, like maybe you work a minimum wage job at your local grocery store, but you want to
Yeah.
get into art. Aaron has got hundreds of hours on the YouTube page that are completely free.
Yeah,
You
those are
know,
free. Absolutely. Yep.
um, And then you can even next level it up to, okay, I can only afford to spend $5 or $10 a month. Aaron's got
Right.
you there, you know. And
Yeah.
then then he'll even they even discount it to where, you know, you're not going to pay more than $200 for a membership, you know.
No. And
I'll
that gives
use
you everything. That's 700 hours of education on the site. That's everything on the site. So yeah, it's
hmm
yeah. So we're always doing something, a sale or whatever. It's hey, tomorrow's the 29th. We're doing a 29% off sale.
There you go. So I guess my point is for everybody that, and another thing too to point out is that this is an art website. This is if you're into acrylic or oil painting, or if you want to
Yeah,
just learn sculpture, this is not just for animators only.
exactly. That, you know, my background before animation was drawing and painting. And so we have a lot of traditional art,
hmm
traditional media, charcoal drawing, watercolor, acrylic, oil. Then we've also got digital art. We've got animation and all kinds of stuff. So
hmm
it's great. I love doing it. And then the other thing too that we've been doing over the last several years is I went back to filmmaking, and so I wanted to create my own film called
Right.
Snow Bear. And so we decided, hey, let's add some value to the membership of the website. And so twice a week, which is how Gene and I met. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I live stream me making the film, and so people can tune in and see how an animated film is made, and that's a great little community as well. I love it.
And I think that that piece there, like if you go online and look for like getting some mentorship from say someone that's a former Disney or Warner Brothers whatever animator, you're going to be paying several hundred if not thousands of dollars to get that sort of education. And when
Right.
you're a membership, I feel like I'm plugging here, but if you're a membership here at CAT, you get to sit down and watch Aaron do these line by line. Like you could literally sit there and watch video after video of how he solves different problems that come
Right.
up as he's animating.
Yeah, I want it to be a resource for people, and like I said, I want people to see the process and learn
Mhm.
from it. So there you go. And it's great for me because I've obligated myself at least twice a week to sit down and have to make this thing because I've got to join in with you guys. So
You've made
so
the
it
members your
helping me
boss of
get it done.
accountability.
Yeah, exactly,
Well,
exactly.
the other thing that I would point out is that for those that are like, well, what kind of credentials, blah blah blah, you can get certified now in a couple ways through the website too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're not accredited, or we don't have
right.
college accreditation, but the information is there, and you can be certified that you've taken the courses, because there's a lot of businesses out there, studios that want to get further education for their employees, and so a lot of them will want some kind of certificate of completion to show that they've done that. So we've provided that, and it's just and sometimes it helps get you the job as well.
hmm
Um, so it's you can, I think we have it for animation, we have it for character design, we have several different certificates of completion that you can get with us.
Okay. Well, as far as I don't know if you want to mention briefly, but are there any other there any big future things going on with CAT that you have planned besides, you know, obviously you're trying to finish the Snow Bear project,
Yeah.
but you know.
We're slowly easing into becoming more of we're always going to be an education studio. We're always going to be teaching.
Mm,
We're kind of stretching out to bigger parts of the world as well, but we're also kind of easing into doing longer form film as well,
mm,
maybe becoming a film studio at some point. So not necessarily not like a Disney or something like that, but on that scale, but definitely creating longer form, even feature length films down the road. So that's something that we're slowly working towards to see if we can
yeah.
get there.
Well,
So
that's cool that
that's
you've got some more content in the workings. So
we do, yeah. And
yeah.
so Snow Bear, hopefully, if it comes out the way we want it to come out, it's gonna hopefully kind of open some doors for us and get some deals made.
Okay, Aaron. Well, I am going to stop us now because I want to
All
go for
right.
another hour and just get into the woods of what we are talking about, especially, in the
Sure.
90s and more stories. So maybe
Yeah.
sometime this year before 2025, I can
Yeah.
have you
We could
back
always
on
get
and
back together and do it again for sure.
yeah, appreciate it. All right, Aaron. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah.
It's been
And I
awesome talking.
appreciate you joining twice a week. And I always love seeing Gene the dancing machine coming on.
All right, Aaron. Well, thanks a lot and have a great day.
All right, my man. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.